My guest, you know him, Stephen Yates, foreign policy expert, having previously advised during the Bush administration. He joins us now from his secret Minecraft Lego bunker. Stephen, first off, boy, oh boy, I wanted to get your reaction to the reporting that the administration was stunned by this, because from everything that we see, I mean, what was it back in, I think this was in June or July, members of the Taliban were meeting with Chinese officials, which that suggests that that's a little bit more than an underdog. If you're meeting with other leaders, other state leaders, and trying to normalize relations so that you can be legitimized, knowing that and some of the other, I just don't know how they were stunned, Stephen.
Well, Dana, this is just an absolute travesty unrolling in front of our eyes. I mean, personally, it hurts very, very much to watch these things. I was in the White House before, during, and after 9/11. I got home that day with my 2-year-old daughter at the time, and too late pulling her eyes away from a TV because there was still visual of bodies falling behind her in New York. And then to see this video of bodies falling from an American craft going out of Kabul 20 years later, it's just devastating to watch how badly this has been handled. Quite literally, there is nothing that could have possibly been handled worse. Not a single piece of this, the communications piece of this, the logistics of this. It's just overwhelmingly botched. And I fear that the consequences will be so far reaching beyond anything that we conceive of in Afghanistan. We've talked many, many times that weakness is provocative. This was the most profound, humiliating, worst possible message. And to have the National Security Advisor come out and say, well, in fairness, we often use helicopters. My God, man, have some dignity. Find your brain. Maybe tender your resignation, because you failed the president, you failed the country, and increasingly you're failing the world. You called for no less against the Bush administration and those who followed. So I mean, it just hurts your mind and your soul to watch these guys botch all of it.
It does. We're talking with Stephen Yates at YatesComms on Twitter is his handle. That's where you can find him. I have no idea, Stephen. Do you, as to why they closed Bagram Air Force Base and hauled out before evacuating American personnel, before evacuating any of the informants, Afghan informants or interpreters, getting out some of those allies that, they helped us on the promise that we would protect them. And that doesn't look like it's happening. I've talked to so many people who worked previously with Mike Pompeo, who were talking about how they were trying to move heaven and earth to get some of these allies of ours out before they and their entire families get murdered. And it's heartbreaking. Why in the world did we close Bagram Air Force Base before we had everybody out?
No, Dana, it's just another one of those things where simple logistics, and this is another one where, I mean, the American people are very, very likely going to be sold a big lie later today about that this was something that was possible, even predictable, but wasn't inevitable, and it's certainly not our fault.
That's what the talking points that Pelosi's sending out say right now. You just nailed it.
That is a big, big lie. And basically, we have to rely on the American people to know this is not a debate about whether we were going to withdraw from Afghanistan or not. This is a debate about, did anyone in the chain of command, including the commander-in-chief, know at all what they were doing? And will they take any responsibility? I mean, the president can't unspeak the words that he said on camera. The president can't untweet what he said about, when I'm president, I'm going to take responsibility and I won't blame others, when all they are doing is blame others. And so, we've got this problem. Yes, Afghanistan is going to face some risks, but the American people know instinctively, if you're going to go into a dangerous situation and withdraw, you would do something to mitigate the damage to the vulnerable. You certainly would honor the commitment of those who risked their lives to protect yours and to further your mission. You wouldn't be saying the day before things fall apart that all is okay and we're going to stay, and then all of a sudden we're not going to stay, and then fall back on, but helicopters are normal. This is just so completely wrecked. And honestly, I just think that there's no remedy at this point other than a list of resignations being tendered, really the top layers of the national security leadership have failed in a profound and fundamental way. The whole world knows it. The only question is, will we accept the truth?
And that's the truth. I feel as though that not just the administration, but really military brass, top military officials, and even top officials in intelligence haven't been honest with us, because I keep wondering if this is being set up where intel officials are blaming Biden, and then Biden rejects it and says, no, this is what you tell us, because nobody wants to assume blame for this FUBAR exercise that ended up being what it is. Is that what you're anticipating? I mean, is this just we had bad intelligence because everyone was focusing on white rage and CRT?
Well, Dana, usually I'm the dark lord of pessimism.
I know you are. I'm afraid to ask you this question.
I'm trying to explain why I'm a little bit optimistic, because the Biden administration and their supporters are trying to ride the tiger that is, I'm going to pass the blame to the deep state. And the one thing that we know now, without any argument, is that there is such a thing, and that bronco will buck. And I think that the leaks of the self-serving, selfish posers who went into this administration, they're going to start beginning. And the people in the bureaucracy are going to begin leaking like a sieve, because they're all going to be protecting themselves and their future. And they don't really care about Joe Biden. They don't really care about any of the top leadership. And so we're just beginning that process. It's ugly as an American. I wish it wasn't so. It's humiliating for our country. It's a terrible time because there are bad people in the world that need to be stood up to. There are good people in the world that need friends and protection and support and cooperation. And our government right now is just failing in that. They think that all they had to do is to say the right words and not be a mean tweeter. And in some ways, they probably could have succeeded without doing anything, but not doing those things. But they went further. They made it worse. We know what the military was doing for the last 6 months. It's been testified before Congress where their priorities were. And it was not getting the warfighting machine right. It wasn't explaining what our mission was. It wasn't protecting the innocent in an inevitable withdrawal from Afghanistan.
Yeah, we're talking with Stephen Yates at YatesComms on Twitter, foreign policy expert who worked in the Bush administration. Stephen, one of the things that I'm seeing also, and bizarrely, and I wanted to pull this up because you mentioned the big lie that's going to be going out, and you nailed it, because the phrase that's used 3 times in Nancy Pelosi's White House talking points that she sent out at 12:06 p.m. That was, I think that was Eastern time, is that it was an inevitability. It was not an inevitability. It was a possibility. But then she says, later on when they're talking about was this an intelligence failure? She adds, when Trump made the Doha agreement, there were 13,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. When POTUS took office, Trump had drawn them down to 2,500. Stephen, the way that I understand it is that, Trump, he wanted to enter into, because you always try diplomacy, right? They always said that he's going to be a warmonger, and they freaked out when he carried out a drone strike on Soleimani, and all those people were very upset. Now they're mad that he was like withdrawing 13,000 down to 2,500. But the way that I understood it, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that Taliban never had any intention to honor this agreement. And that became incredibly clear when they said, no, we're not going to give up association with al-Qaeda, which ultimately that's why we still had a residual force left over. Is that correct?
It is correct, but essentially, I will give no quarter to anyone who wants to pin this on a previous administration. I don't have to defend the past administration. I wasn't a part of the past administration. I supported a lot of what they did, and I think it was frankly historic in a lot of ways. And it's shameful that everything is being turned the other way. But there has been no speed bump in the way of this team coming in from day one and saying, we reject everything from the last administration, every executive order, every policy. And so they freaking own all of this all the time. You don't try to be commander in chief and wear the bomber jacket, but you don't take responsibility for the bombs flying. This is the job. And if he wasn't up for it, his family should have loved him more and not let him go through with it. And so we're stuck with where we are right now. Frankly, I think we're tragically in a constitutional crisis because we don't have an effective leader of our country. We don't have an effective backup leader to our country. The vice president supposedly was urged to address the press yesterday, and out of concern for her image, she said, no, you're not going to stick this bleep on me. we have a complete absence of leadership in a crisis, and so we're going to have to find a way as a people and with other institutions to push through. But I'm scared for what's going on in our government right now without responsibility and leadership.
Yeah, and to that, we're talking with Stephen Yates here, and because obviously anybody that we're ever going to need as an intelligence ally is going to hesitate, seeing how we treated our allies here by leaving Afghanistan the way that they did. But I have to bring in this up as well. As you know, the Communist Chinese Party there in Beijing, through all of their state-affiliated media, and I'm looking at about 3 different accounts here, through all of their propaganda pieces, it sounds like they're saber rattling. Global Times just said it straight out. They said, quote, "From what happened in Afghanistan, those in Taiwan should perceive that once a war breaks out in the Straits, the island's defense will collapse in hours and U.S. military won't come to help. As a result, the DPP will quickly surrender." Do you think that the projected by, I think they said something like maybe within the next 10 years, China might move on Taiwan. Do you feel like as though because of this and everything that's happened in Afghanistan that timeline has drastically shrank?
Well, I am very, very concerned that right now, because of the absence of leadership, because of the image of weakness that has now been projected everywhere, it's going to take a lot to rebuild credibility. You lose it in an instant, but it takes years sometimes to try to rebuild. And in those kind of circumstances, you have to ask, if things are not going that well in China generally, and if the United States is bogged down in other kinds of problems, when will it be a more fortuitous set of circumstances to push on this? The other thing is the intelligence community and the Congress and others need to be pressing on who knew what, when, and how. Maybe that will happen. But clearly, Beijing knew something was happening in Afghanistan that our president didn't seem to know, that the Speaker of the House didn't seem to know, because the Global Times, the Communist Party mouthpiece, not only said these words you mentioned, they produced a polished propaganda political warfare video on it in under 24 hours. They knew. They knew. And so if they knew, how did we not know? Because of course we did know. And so, yes, this is blatant, naked political aggression by Beijing on the heels of a disaster, a PR disaster, a strategic disaster in Afghanistan. I fear for what's going on with Taiwan. Now, again, since I don't want to be the dark lord of pessimism all the time, the people of Taiwan will fight. These are 23 million people who've lived through colonialism, martial law, whatever else. I just hope that they don't have to sacrifice too much to protect that freedom. Hopefully this is bluster and political warfare and smart people can push back, but it's dangerous. And I do worry the near-term risks have gone way up.
I do too. I do as well. I worry of that. And then, of course, Russia deciding 2 last really quick questions. I know I'm running this break out, but 2 really last quick questions. Is that going to empower or embolden Russia to make a move, perhaps maybe on Ukraine, now that the pipeline's going around and they don't really so much have to worry about them as a transit country? And then lastly, all of the drones and equipment left at Bagram that now ends up in Taliban's hands, are they going to sell that to China and then they're just going to reverse engineer it and they're going to just get us on tech?
Yeah, so on the Russia one, I'll just be quick because we can unpack that at another time. I'm less worried about that because they've got 90% of what they want anyway. They don't need to push that final 10 yards. But maybe they will, maybe they won't. Certainly not a good signal from us. When it comes to that material, that's another one of those things that every American has to scratch our head saying, how did we not think about securing expensive, dangerous, taxpayer-paid-for material from falling into the wrong hands? Whether they sell it, they use it, they give it to Pakistan, it goes out to other people in bad networks. Iran is right next door. I mean, China is not the only bad place things could fall into the wrong hands for. It's devastating and just mind-blowing that that's where this ended up. They had all the time in the world to plan this. And it seems like it wasn't even back of the napkin last-minute material in the way it was executed.
Just a nightmare, just a nightmare. Stephen Yates, we always appreciate your perspective on this, especially today of all days at Yates Comms. And I know we're going to still continue to have a lot to talk about in the days to come. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you, Dana. Take care.
Of course.